we're going to talk a little bit about the unit circle and the idea of radians. Radians actually comes directly from the idea of the radius, and that the circumference of a circle is, we can go back to our basic geometry knowledge that the circumference of a circle is comes from this equation here, 2 pi r. And in the unit circle, the radius of the unit circle is 1, and so the circumference of the entire outside of the circle is 2 pi. And instead of thinking about an angle describing a portion of the circle, we talk about the arc length and how it describes a portion of the circle. Now, and then in the last video, we talked about terminal points, which are those points around those important points around the outside of the circle, that are the terminal points, or where that arc stops. Okay, and they talk in the book. They talk about the t distance, so the distance along the outside that has that terminal point. And instead of talking about degrees and stuff, we're going to talk in terms of radians, and so portions of a distance. Let me get my pen going again. Now, so let's go over to this little video here. Now, we talked about how I talked about how the whole, if you look at the whole circle, right? If we look at this distance, right, as we approach this, it actually shuts off right at the last second, but you can see that that's 6.27, right, which is awfully close to 2 times pi over 2 pi, right? And so half the circle is 3.14, or pi. You can see it pop up there, okay? And so if we go halfway around the circle, that angle, which we would think about as 180 degrees, but we're going to start talking about it in terms of pi. So that is pi radians around the circle. What do you mean by pi radians? Well, it's 3.14 radiuses around the circle. Now, if we go back until we have 1 radian, right? That, if you can imagine, let's see this, no. If you can imagine, that is just going from, if you take this radius from the center here at 0, 0, and 1, 1, then, and just lay that around the outside of the circle, that is 1 radius, right? And it doesn't matter if it was a bigger circle, it would make up the same proportion of it, okay? Now, so let's talk about some of those critical values, okay? So we have 0, where we've gone nowhere, right? And then we have halfway around is pi, and all the way around is 2 pi. Okay, if I go there, it'll disappear, but that's 2 pi, okay? So if half of the way around is pi, then we know that half of the half, it would be pi over 2. And then we think about it, then if we work down a little bit further, half of that, so if that's pi over 2, then this would be pi over 4. Let's see if we can get that that idea going down here. Okay. So if I have my circle, centered at the origin, right? And we know that this location is pi. This location is 2 pi, or 0. And then we can start talking about all these other divisions, right? So we have pi over 2, because if you imagine, if this circumference is pi, then half of that is pi over 2. And then we can divide that up again. Half of that is going to be pi over 4. Okay. And then as we move around a lot of times we're going to be working with fractions where we're going to move around the circle in, for example, pi's over 4. So for here, this would be pi over 4, and then this would be 2 pi over 4, which reduces to pi over 2. The next division is going to be 3 pi over 4. And then this one is 4 pi over 4, which reduces to just pi. And then the next division of pi's over 4, so if that's 4 pi over 4, this is 5 pi over 4. And then this would be 6 pi over 4, which reduces to 3 pi over 2. And then if that's 6 pi over 2, then this is 7 pi over 2. Now going back to our terminal angles, right? So if this is perfectly even, right, halfway between these two, then we can see that these two sides are the same. And so our terminal point here, right, our terminal point is going to have equivalent x and y coordinates. And so this is going to be root 2 over 2, comma, root 2 over 2. As we move around, we know that this terminal point is 0, positive 1, because we can just look at that on the axis and see. And then this terminal point is going to have the same values, 2 over 2 and root 2 over 2, but the x coordinate is going to be negative because it's in that second quadrant. So it's going to be negative root 2 over 2, comma, root 2 over 2. And that will be my terminal point, that is 3.3 pi over 4 distance around the outside of that circle. Okay. And then we can keep going around. So this would be 5 pi over 4 would be the point, that's in the third quadrant, so both the x and the y are going to be negative. So it's going to be negative root 2 over 2, root 2 over 2, and root 2 over 2. Then we can go, here is the coordinates of this is 1, negative 1, or 0, negative 1. And then this one is going to be because it's in the fourth quadrant, my x coordinate is going to be positive, and my y coordinate is going to be negative. Okay. Now let's go back to our little drawing here. And let's start incorporating some of these points as we move around. Okay. So there are all my root 2's over 2's. Okay. And you can see the signs are positive and negative. Okay. Now another one that we were concerned about a lot is if we think about a third of the circle, right? So if this is pi and then this is the first third, right? Then that's going to be pi divided by 3, 1/3 of pi, right? And we can see that those are the coordinates of 1/2 and root 3 over 2. And we'll go back over here and we'll talk about thirds of pi's. Okay. So once again, if I draw my little circle poo, and this is pi, and this is 1/3 of pi, or pi over 3, then my next third of pi would be 2/3 of pi, or 2 pi over 3. So in other words, my arc extended just a little bit further, so that there's 1 pi over 3, and there's 2 pi over 3, and then we have 3 pi over 3, or 1. Okay. So let's keep working our way around here. So if this is 3 pi over 3, or 1, then the next one's going to be 4 pi over 3. And then 5 pi over 3. And then finally 6 pi over 3, which is 2 pi. Anyway, so that's kind of the basic sketch. And then we can divide that up one more time, and then we get our pi over 6's. And our pi over 6's are going to be here, right? And you can see that the y coordinate is smaller than the x coordinate. So this is going to be the point 1/2 root 3 over 2. Anyway, that was just a quick video to kind of get you guys familiar with this idea of the unit circle and a little bit about radians. And when they're talking about reference angles and terminal points, what they mean is if I go from here to this point here, then I can see that this would be my terminal point. This would be a pi over 3 because it's 1/3 of the distance to pi. And yeah, and you can use that to fill out the rest of the unit circle. So after you have all your terminal points, you should fill it in with your pi's or your radian degree measures.